you.
I think we'll go ahead and get started. If anybody comes along late, that's fine. We'll come in. My name is Nikki Anderson-Knott, and I'm with the SSP Corps facility. And I'm not going to take up any time telling you all about us. If you have any questions about the SSP Corps, feel free to talk to me afterwards, and I can fill you in on all the services that we provide. Today, you are here for an introduction to mixed methods research. And our presenter today is Dr. John Creswell. He is, a little background on him, he's a Clifton and endowed professor who directs the Mixed Methods Research Project, which studies human resource development within the undergraduate leadership program in education. He's also a professor in educational psychology, and he teaches courses and writes about both qualitative methodology and mixed modes research. And he's been here at the university for 30 years, so he's very well experienced. He also co-directs the Office of Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research, and that unit provides campus support for scholars incorporating qualitative and mixed methods research into their projects for extramural funding. He is also the co-editor for the New Sage Journal, which is the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. And he's been an adjunct professor of family medicine at the University of Michigan who assists in research methodology and current works on health science projects as a methodologist. And most recently, he's been selected to be a senior Fulbright scholar and will be working in South Africa, bringing mixed methods concepts to visual methodologies for AIDS victims and families. And I also want to mention, we recently have added on to our Ground Bank series and workshop series, and we'll be doing more, if you want to check out the SSP or website, but we're doing more in March, both on mostly on qualitative research. We'll be doing 2 overviews on different software packages that you can use, and also a hands-on workshop that applies to actually using in vivo. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Quest.
Well, thanks for coming. This was supposed to be a brown bag, but no one's eating it. But we have 1 banana. But hopefully this will be just a very brief introduction. I plan to go through these slides by about 10 till 1, so we have a few minutes for questions at the end. And if you have something you'd like to ask as we start, or as I go through these slides, I'm open to questions during the slide presentation as well. I want to begin by talking a little bit about the research office we have. This is the sales pitch portion of the presentation. But I am a co-director of the Office of Qualitative Mixed Methods Research, and it's located in Hensley Hall, room 213. The purpose of our office is to provide consultation on qualitative mixed methods research, help scholars develop proposals for funding, and help conduct and evaluate funded projects. And I believe we're the only qualitative research outfit on this entire campus and probably within the system. Others have started, but I don't know about. We have working in our research office 5 PhDs, myself and Dr. Quinn Clark, right here, as co-director, Dr. Onwuegbuzie, Dr. Denise Green, Dr. Ron Show, back there, and we have 2 RAs, and we're continually adding RAs in the office. We began about 5 years ago. We're currently working on projects in a number of areas: health sciences, physics, language arts, family and child research, educational assessment, veterans affairs. We actually have funding sources this year from 10 different sources. I'm not sure if I have 10 on this list, but you can see this is a collection of federal agencies as well as private foundations. And basically, all of these groups contract with us. We then assign a person out of our office to work on the project, and we help them out at either the stage of designing proposals, conducting the research, or perhaps even evaluating the research. We've also had a pretty prolific record of publications and funded projects. We've had 23 funded projects since we opened that we've worked on. So this is just a small segment of the private foundations and the public monies of projects we've been funded on. We've published 28 journal articles, 5 books and book chapters. Our office is also the central editorial office for the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. And I might add that we're a self-supporting unit on this campus, so we don't derive any funds really from any other unit. We are located within educational psychology and the College of Education and Human Sciences. Well, I thought about how to approach this topic. We've been out over the last, I would say, 4 years giving workshops, especially in the spring, every month. And so we've spoken to social workers, sociologists, psychologists, health science researchers, family medicine researchers. It goes on, international audiences. Last year, for example, I was working in South Africa, Australia, England, and Canada, giving workshops on mixed methods to different groups. So we've been out. And I thought I would just talk today a little bit about the topics that I discuss in my mixed methods classes. Right now there's an Ed Psych mixed methods class going on, Ed Psych 936, that I'm teaching. People that enroll in that are from all across the social and health sciences. And these topics are also ones we use in the workshops. We try to first have people think about what is the core idea involved in mixed methods research, because I think there's a lot of misconception out there. It's an emerging field, and it's new to many. So we talked about the core idea, assumptions that one needs to have when they come forward to do this form of research, when to use mixed methods research, some of the basic elements that are involved in doing mixed methods research. We try to create a picture of what the mixed methods literature looks like, some of the philosophical assumptions. We focus on 4 specific designs that are really at the core, although there are many variants within these designs. How you choose a design, some of the procedural challenges. You might view these coming from a quantitative standpoint as threats to validity or threats to the rigor or sensitivity of the design. We talk about standards for evaluation, and we also mention here some future research areas, because this is an emerging field. So let's get right to the core idea of what this is all about. In many of our research studies in the social and health sciences, we collect quantitative data. Now, with the popularity of qualitative in the last decade or so in the social sciences, 2 decades, people are also collecting qualitative data. And you see here 2 separate strands of data being collected that I would hope are responsive to the quantitative and qualitative research questions, set of questions. I want to focus in on the data here because it's a little easier to understand the core idea. A lot of people view mixed methods as simply this. I'm going to collect qualitative data and quantitative data. Now, the element that we're talking about is if you put a line between there, but yet think about bridging across those 2 data pools. We're moving towards mixed methods research. Now, what if some people came along and drew a circle around this bridge across and called it mixed methods methodology? In other words, creating a methodology that intersects quantitative and qualitative. So now you start asking slightly different questions in your research. How can we use both forms of data to best understand the problem? And how might we write research questions? What would be the philosophical assumptions? And what would be the data analysis strategies? And how would you write this up for a journal article? And how would you title it? Now you're speaking about methodologies. We think about it in the social sciences, that it covers all these processes that are involved in research. So I'm going to create this circle for you as it's currently being discussed in the literature. Now, to come at this topic, I think one needs to have a certain perspective. The assumptions need to be conducted at this point. First of all, I am bringing in qualitative research. And if you don't believe in qualitative research, this is probably not for you. Because it's going to require that you know something about qualitative research to do this form, this methodology. Also, the idea that methodology is not static, but it evolves over time. If you think back to the 1970s, we weren't working with structural equation modeling back then. And if you go back to the 50s and earlier, we weren't working with meta-analysis. And some of the newer techniques in narrative analysis, narrative research, and qualitative research, even 20 years ago, we didn't know much about. So methodologies do evolve. And we're evolving right now into a methodology that transcends both quantitative and qualitative methodologies, called mixed methods. Also, believing in the diversity of methodology. I like that term. I think this is really what we're promoting here, is an openness to embracing many different perspectives to get at the research problems that we have. There might be some times when either approaching the study from a straight quantitative approach or qualitative may not be adequate to help us understand the problem. One of the strongest rationales, we've gone through a lot of rationales thinking about why do we do this form of research, but one rationale that's very convincing for many people is that mixed methods research is very natural and intuitive. If you think about so many situations that we're faced with in our everyday life, and I often point to the disaster in New Orleans with Katrina. It's important to get the numbers, but it's also important to hear the voices of the people. And CNN was reflecting both of those perspectives. So in many arenas in our life, especially in the policy sector, we're looking for both the hard numbers as well as the contextualized information from individuals to build a total picture. So it's a very logical move to begin thinking, now that qualitative is fairly well established, to think about how we might begin to merge and integrate the two. So some situations where you might use mixed methods research. Assume that you're measuring a concept on an instrument. And these are very simplified examples, but I think hopefully they'll make the point. You have a sense that scores are not telling you the entire story, and you need to ask a few people about the concept. And in doing so, you might develop a larger, more contextualized, fuller understanding. A more complete understanding of the problem often emerges in some forms of mixed methods research. Or you're looking over the instruments available to study a concept, and they were certainly not developed given the sample and population that you want to study quantitatively. You may need to develop an instrument that's more contextually based in the needs of the sample and population you study. So why not begin with a qualitative exploration, build that instrument, and then test it out? So the context of building specific instruments that are context specific is another good direction. Or how about this one? You are gathering data about factors that predict outcomes using several instruments. And although you have general information about the importance of these predictors, you can only guess what really explains why the results came out the way they did. Why not follow up that quantitative study with a qualitative study that then helps you explain some of those results in more detail? Or this one, and since I work in the health sciences quite a bit, this is the design that the project officers of NIH told me is the one mixed methods design they'd like to see. If you're conducting an intervention study, and you have an intervention that was developed by other researchers, you're not certain if it will work with the sample you're studying, you might first explore with some individuals to determine if that intervention is going to work when it's administered during an experiment. Begin qualitatively. Explore what that intervention might look like if it would actually work with the sample that you want to study, and then do your follow-up experiment. Mixed methods is very popular in the field of evaluation research, which cuts across the social and human sciences. And in fact, there are many evaluators in the country that tell me, John, we discovered this idea first, and we've been using it. But it's not a systematic methodology. It's not that complete circle the way I'm going to describe it. In evaluation, you may want to evaluate the performance of an organization. This calls for understanding the expected outcomes of the organization, a needs assessment, which could be done qualitatively. Designing some instruments to measure those outcomes, moving from the qualitative to the quantitative, and then administering that instrument and perhaps even gathering qualitative to help explain why the outcomes occur. So mixed methods can tie together several steps in evaluation approach. And there are some good studies that are mixed methods, longitudinal, multi-phase projects out there in the field of evaluation. So that kind of leads us to a basic definition that we use. Mixed methods research is a methodology for conducting research that involves collecting, analyzing, and integrating quantitative and qualitative research in a single study, a longitudinal program of inquiry. And the basic assumption is that both forms of research in combination provide a better understanding of the research problem or issue than either approach alone. Now what I'm going to do is take that definition and break it down into some parts. So mixed methods is seen as a methodology. It spans the entire process. For example, when I'm visiting with my colleagues from the UK, their interest lies primarily at this philosophical level. And they want to talk about the epistemology of doing mixed methods research. And then I might get to the United States and talk with people about how to design questions in the process of research. Of course, it involves collecting data, analyzing, interpreting it, recording it. So we tend to view this as a methodology spanning the process of research. That means, in this definition also, that we need to know what quantitative research is. And for all of you, I'm sure this is apparent, although it's often helpful to just kind of go over some of these basics when we do workshops and when I teach this in class. Quantitative research, variable-oriented, hypothesis-driven. Might have research questions. Instrument-oriented, closed-ended questions. The reliability and validity of scores on those instruments. Statistical analysis, often inferential analysis, effect size analysis. Some of the key concepts of generalizing, replicating, control, lack of bias. We need to know this because a good mixed method study is going to have a very rigorous quantitative component to it. And over on the qualitative side, now this slide is especially important. If you're familiar with qualitative research in the United States right now, I describe it as a lot of different, very diverse communities. What you might get in our EdSci qualitative course might differ from what you get at Boston University in their qualitative course. So you need to know the different orientation. Now, my orientation is from an applied research methodologist perspective. So I'm going to take you through the process of research when I talk about what qualitative research is. Studying a central phenomenon, asking very open-ended questions, working with the views of the participants as opposed to the researcher imposing his or her orientation on the study. Field issues such as giving back, reciprocity, respect for sites. Coming up with some type of analysis that gets at description, theme analysis, maybe interrelating the themes. So granted theory as a qualitative approach, maybe interrelating the different categories to come up with propositions, or some type of explanation for the process you're studying. And interpretation, where interpretation has many levels. Interpretation by the researcher, interpretation by the participant, participation by the readers. It's a multifaceted interpretive approach that plays into qualitative. A personal reflexivity, where we position ourselves at the front, up front, in doing qualitative research rather than in the background. So in my case studies, I write about my own personal experiences. Sometimes in epilogue, sometimes in the methods section. Sometimes I'm threaded throughout. I may even do an autoethnography, which is entirely about me. I wrote an autoethnography project a couple of years ago on this topic and submitted it to a conference. And the reviewers came back and said, "John, you must be going through a midlife crisis." And that was before autoethnography was caught on. But you know, that personal description of who we are. A flexible writing structure. We spent a lot of time in my qualitative classes looking at different writing structures attached to narrative research, phenomenology, grounded theory, case studies, ethnography. Often coming out with mean or even possibly advocacy or groups or individuals. Now, in that definition, I also said mixed methods involves collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. So always review what these forms look like, knowing that these aren't always mutually exclusive categories here. But in quantitative, we tend to have more closed-ended information, whereas in qualitative, we want to open it up. So in quantitative, instrument data, behavioral checklists, records and documents. One I often use in education, like attendance records of students in a school. Quantitative data. Qualitative is a little more elusive to get your hands around because all of the new forms are developing daily, it seems. For example, text messaging on your telephone could be a form of qualitative data. I tend to group this into open-ended interviews, open-ended observations, documents, which could be private letters, minutes, organizational documents, could be newspaper accounts, and then audio-visual types of materials, running from pictures we take with our cell phone, photographs, could be pictures, artifacts, email messages, arrays, fairly extensive. In one of my qualitative books, I keep a running list I call it Compendium of Qualitative Data Sources. Every time I revise that book, I go back and I just keep adding new ones. Like sounds can be a source of data. And of course, qualitative and quantitative data analysis. So now, all this I should be on familiar territory for many people. From quantitative statistical analysis, comparing groups, relating variables, doing causal modeling, over to the quantitative side, using text, images, coding, theme development, relating themes. So I set the background in what constitutes quantitative and qualitative data collection analysis. Now we're into a new arena here on this slide. How do you go about mixing these two forms of data? And I talk about three models here that are very popular in the mixed methods literature right now. One is to converge the data, to actually bring a quantitative and qualitative database together and to merge the two. And most of the time when I ask people how they would do that, they don't know. And I'm going to show you here and talk about that as we move ahead a little bit. Because you're basically trying to merge, for example, numeric data with text data. How are you going to bring those two together in a meaningful way? That's one form of mixing. In fact, when most people think of mixed method research, that's what they have in mind. What they don't think about are some of the other ways that you can mix across. For example, you could start a study, qualitative study, and build on what you've learned to develop an instrument, and then test that instrument out. Now you're connecting across, essentially, qualitative data results, and using that to build into items, scales, instruments on quantitative. You're connecting across quantitative and qualitative. Connecting data. A third one, it's out there quite a bit. It's in that example that I mentioned earlier. You might do an experiment, and within the experiment you have a small supportive qualitative part that provides additional insight into how an intervention might work in the experiment. You're actually embedding qualitative into a supportive role within a larger study. And this is the one that really has caught our curiosity lately, because there are examples, many, many examples out there that you stop and think about it. There's a book out in England by Jean Elliott on doing qualitative research and doing narrative qualitative research and gathering both quantitative and qualitative data to build that narrative story. There are studies going on where individuals are using causal modeling, longitudinal causal modeling, longitudinal designs. And within that, they're embedding a small qualitative step to help them explain some of the outcomes that are beginning to emerge. In ethnography, ethnography can involve both qualitative and quantitative data.
I think it's in terms of the collected data. So So that's why I have confused the difference between mixed method and qualitative research. Because in doing qualitative research, in order to analyze the data, we have to quantify those qualitative research. So I just confused because so in terms of the method of analyzing the data.
Yeah. Taking your example, you could collect qualitative data and you could transform it into quantitative data and then measure that, put that quantitative information into a survey or look at that quantitative information and gather some data on that. And that would be connected. I call it data transformation. I could transform into qualitative data into quantitative. Now that also raises the question of, where are the boundaries of what constitutes mixed methods research? And that's one of those kind of gray areas. You're not collecting two different sources of data, as in the core idea that I gave you earlier. You're collecting one source of data, qualitative, but you're transforming it into quantitative. Basically, the picture is you collect qualitative data, transform it to quantitative, and you may also do some qualitative analysis on it. So you collect qualitative data, but you may do quantitative and qualitative analysis. See that? I can draw that picture out for you.
Yeah.
Another aspect of that definition was it could be a single study or multiple studies. So this would be a dissertation where you gather quantitative and qualitative data and form the results. Or multiple studies like what we see in our large-scale, 3-year NIH-funded projects. I'm working on a couple up in Michigan now that are just multi-phase studies. But if you look at all the studies grouped together, we would call this a mixed methods program of inquiry that's going on. I'm writing an article now about a 3-year project that I would characterize as a multi-phase mixed method design. And it has both quantitative and qualitative components in it. Well, in the class and in workshops, we try to get people to focus on this body of literature. Someone asked, when did mixed methods really begin? I would probably say, point to the serious work being done with mixed methods back to 1988 and 89. 2 sociologists, actually 3 sociologists, wrote 2 books on multi-method research and really launched a discussion. Almost at the same time, there were a number of evaluation researchers in the country, Jennifer Green, University of Illinois, that were also writing about mixed methods literature and research at that time. So the late 80s, certainly. But what happened then in the 90s were a number of people said, this is an interesting idea. Let me start writing about it. And a number of books started to emerge. 1998, Tashakkori and Teddlie's Mixed Methodology. And the books have continued on. We've been able to identify 14 different separate books on how to do mixed methods research. Now, the reason why most people don't know about this is it's spread all across different disciplines. So you have evaluators who are writing the books, sociologists, educational writers, policy people, across the disciplines. So part of our agenda with the journal is to try to bring these together. There are several journals that now are devoted to mixed methods research. Conference papers are being presented. There's a lot of methodological discussions, and there are many actual research studies that employ mixed methods research. It's a huge movement. It's a huge movement nationally, United States, and internationally. And so I put my book on the top here, one of the books, Research Design, where I began writing about mixed methods in 1992. So I'm very first generation to this field. And at that time, I just didn't know what I had. I didn't even know, I thought I did a lot of criticism about it. I call it combined research. Then we have 1998, the Tashakkori Teddlie book on mixed methodology, the 1997 book on mixed methods research and evaluation, and then the handbook of mixed methods research that came out from SAGE in 2003. So these are some of the major books. And then I brought along the book that I wrote with Dr. Plano Clark It came out last September called Designing and Conducting Mixed Methods Research, which is our attempt to bring all these ideas together. And then last October, the first issue of this journal, the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, came out. And here are some flyers on this journal if you'd like to submit your manuscript. Now, this body of literature that's emerged since 1998, the picture is still emerging as to what it looks like. But certainly the topic of paradigm use, different research designs, threats to rigor using these designs, how to do sampling, how to do data analysis in mixed methods research, how to write study aims and research questions. A whole notation system is developed, a shorthand system. So, for example, we use 4 letters, QUAM and QUAL. Notice that both have 4 letters only. So we're getting parity here between the two approaches. And we'll use capital letters to emphasize priority given to it, and lowercase letters to show that it has secondary priority within the study. I'm going to show you some designs here in a few minutes, but the notation system is started out. There's been more and more interest in collaboration, interdisciplinary teamwork in mixed methods research. There was a great editorial recently in the Annals of Family Medicine about how you should write mixed method studies for the medical journals, where you're limited to 3,000 words, and how do you bring the mixed method study into that word level? And of course, evaluating mixed methods research. What quality standards do we use in assessing this form of inquiry? One of the topics on this list was the philosophical assumptions. And when I travel abroad and talk about mixed methods research, this is the arena that attracts the most attention. Americans we're very practical in our way of looking at research. And we want to know how we're going to use it. Whereas in many of the Commonwealth countries, they're very interested in what philosophical worldview, what are the larger, deeper philosophical assumptions. So, starting with what worldview informs mixed methods research, I might give you what theoretical lenses would be used, what methodological approach, and here I put mixed methods into this arena of methodology, and then specifically what methods of data collection. And this actually came out of a book by Crotty called The Foundations of Social Research out of the UK. And so we spend time talking about different philosophical assumptions in the worldview. The ontology, how we see reality, epistemology, axiology, the use of values, methodology, how we conduct it, and the rhetorical assumptions, how we actually talk about this language. And we focus in on several worldviews, and I highlight pragmatism over here. Because when you read about mixed methods research, there are several stances about what worldview informs this form of inquiry. The one that has emerged as one of the most embraced, advocated for among the mixed methods writers would be pragmatism. John Dewey, me, other people that helped form this idea. Basically, it gives license to collect different forms of data to understand your research question. So it's a pluralistic orientation. It's very pragmatic. Let's do research that will have some impact, consequences. John Dewey's idea of consequences of research. In the handbook on mixed methods research by Tashakkori Teddlie, they cited 13 mixed methods writers that embraced pragmatism as the core philosophical assumption, providing legitimacy for mixed methods research. But there are others out there. Another mixed methods researcher, Don Mertens, talks about transformative emancipatory, which I would call advocacy, participatory type of research, can certainly form a philosophical perspective using mixed methods. Some writers are talking about how we can use multiple worldviews in doing mixed methods research. and we just need to make those explicit in our writing. And then I tend to talk about how the type of design that we're using might shape what worldview you're employing. For example, if you're collecting both forms of data at the same time and bringing them together, you can't say it's just a post-positivist worldview and a constructivist worldview. It's got to be something that's larger than those. And pragmatism is a little bit larger. So when you have that type of design, they say probably pragmatism is the worldview as a researcher would use. And so I have my students in my class write about the pragmatic worldview and put that into the proposals for their doctoral dissertations. Whereas if you're doing a sequential, where you're maybe exploring first qualitatively, then let's say developing an instrument that has good psychometric properties and administering that. You've got qualitative followed by quantitative. Now it seems to me that in that case, a person could actually be shifting worldviews. In the first phase, qualitative, you might use a constructivist worldview, more qualitatively oriented. In the second phase, instrument design and administration, it might be more of a quantitative worldview. So we're beginning to think about it. It's a little bit more subtle than just what one worldview you're using in research. We spend a great deal of time in the literature of mixed methods. This tends to be the focus for many, many writers, including our work. What are the different types of designs involved? And we are drawing some pictures, which you will see here. The triangulation, where you actually bring the two databases together in some form of interpretation. As I said earlier, this is one that many people feel typifies what these kinds of research is all about. The embedded designs, where you embed within a larger design a process like a qualitative process. Or it could be a quantitative process. We have some studies where a small quantitative part really plays a very supporting role in a larger, say, qualitative case study. Explanatory mixed methods design, where you begin with quantitative. It might be a survey first. You learn from the survey. You now want to follow a few individuals in focus groups qualitatively to help explain those findings that came through the quantitative first phase. You can shift this around into the exploratory mixed method design, where you might begin qualitatively and explore, and then come up with some results and build this instrument or build this typology that is then studied quantitatively with a large sample population. So I want to take just a minute and talk about each one of these four designs. So the triangulation. It's considered a one-phase project. The idea is concurrent. You gather both forms of data at one time. You combine the results. And you'll see this in the discussion section typically, although I found it in the results section in some journal articles, where they do a nice job of bringing these two databases together. The intent is to merge two separate strands of data. Now, what we started about 4 years ago was to draw pictures of these designs. And they've been extremely useful. Think about how complicated mixed methods procedures are. You're gathering multiple forms of qualitative data, multiple forms of quantitative data. You're trying to bring them together in some way in this triangulation design. Why not draw a picture like this? So every proposal I work on for NIH funding at the University of Michigan, when I work with them, or here, I will encourage the author to begin thinking about what would a visualization of the methodological procedures look like. And there's a lot of elements to this picture, because we have the general flow of ideas going here from the big boxes, but then also we have procedures. And we've identified distinct products at each stage, bringing it together in terms of results. Now, how do you bring the two together? What are some of the popular ways? Number one is data transformation. I'm going to convert my qualitative data into quantitative counts so that it can then be compared easily with the quantitative database I have. Data transformation. Second, and I'm seeing more and more examples of this. It's an area that Dr. Clinton Clark is following in some of her research. and that is to design a matrix that includes both quantitative and qualitative data. So you could visualize categorical data across the horizontal axis and qualitative thematic data along the vertical axis. And within the cells, you could have counts, you could have quotes, you could have major ideas, you could put a lot of things into those cells. And recently, I've run into 3 or 4 papers coming out of different areas like sociology especially, where they're beginning to develop these matrices. And we don't have a lot of information about how to, what they might look like, what the array of possibilities would look like. We're moving in that direction. Another way to bring these 2 results together, and you've probably seen this, but maybe now I'll give you a frame of reference for thinking about it. If you look at a discussion in a mixed method study, you may see where they first report the quantitative results, either descriptive or inferential results. And then in the very next paragraph, they're giving some quotes or some themes from their qualitative database that either support or refute that quantitative. And usually in workshops, I pull up a couple of journal articles. I just show you that discussion section where they lay it out exactly that way. So I call that kind of a side-by-side comparison. So they're really not putting the 2 databases together. They're looking at they're juxtaposing the 2 and going back and forth and asking, are they confirming the same results? Are they presenting a very different picture? And now the conversation is emerging nationally and internationally as to how we deal with contradictory findings when that situation occurs. The embedded, how am I doing? Close? The embedded design. I've already talked about this a little bit, embedding one phase within a larger one. I want to give you this picture. It actually came from a work that a nursing researcher did in 1966, or 1996. And that is talk about where in an experiment you might embed a small qualitative part. And she came up with the idea that it could be embedded before the intervention trial begins, during the intervention trial, or after the trial to follow up on the results. And I actually have a case where I'm working on a Department of Veteran Affairs funded project at Ann Arbor, Michigan, where they have qualitative flowing in all 3 of those places. And then they've specified in their project exactly what role that qualitative will play. But it's a good example of an embedded type of design. So this is a study here where the flow of the experiment is this way, and they gather qualitative data before the intervention to help identify the elements of what the intervention should be. And then they gather qualitative data after the intervention to help explain the results. And so we're writing articles now enumerating all these possibilities of how you could qualitative data in intervention trials. And it's an area that in health sciences is very, very interesting. This explanatory sequential design, 2-phase, gather our quantitative data first, followed up with qualitative in the 2nd phase. So here's a study on adolescent smoking, where we first gathered quantitative data. And we also gathered some qualitative data, but we really didn't use it until later on in the process. And that quantitative data really helped us identify 5 cases of adolescents that had different configurations of depression and smoking behavior. And then we went into our qualitative database and looked at the context in which their longitudinal trajectories, we graphed out their trajectory over time. Some went way up in terms of depression, some stabilized, some went down. We plotted those out. We attempted to explain why those different trajectories occurred through our qualitative database. It's a good example of starting quantitatively, analyzing data, coming up with results that can then help our qualitative follow-up exploration. And then the last one is exploratory sequential, where you begin qualitatively in the 1st phase, follow up quantitative in the 2nd. And this was actually a project conducted in Michigan where this researcher in phase 1 collected qualitative data, analyzed it, came up with certain findings, codes and themes, and then built an instrument, an 80-active instrument, and administered that instrument to 500 individuals, and did the results. So you can see here, we moved from a qualitative and built on that to instrument development in the second phase. So, some of the ways you differentiate these designs. What was our intent for conducting the design in the first place? Was it to get a fuller understanding? Was it because an instrument was not available and we had to develop one? Some of those reasons I began with. Within these designs, there's different emphasis or priority given to the qualitative or quantitative domain. Certainly the type of research questions we're asking, what resources are available, and of course the stakeholders in the field that we're writing this for. Some audiences are more quantitatively oriented, so priority given to a strong initial theoretically oriented quantitative first phase is probably going to sit with those stakeholders. Whether stakeholders are users in the field, whether they're journal article editors, whether they are faculty on committees. I won't go into some of these procedural challenges, but if you want a copy of our paper where we enumerated some of what we do is we take each one of these 4 designs and we talk about what are some of the challenges that emerge procedurally in doing these designs, which most people are not writing about, may not be thinking about, but they certainly are there, such as contradictory findings, how to actually integrate and merge new data transformation, the sample size, the bias. You can see where collecting qualitative data in the middle of an experiment, you may influence the outcomes. So what strategies are out there in the literature where you're doing an embedded experimental design, qualitative coming in during the experiment? What strategies are people using so that bias is not introduced and outcomes are not affected by your qualitative data? Some of the standards we use with the journal for really assessing an article. First of all, do they collect both quantitative and qualitative data? Is there some form of mixing going on? And they may not use these words I'm using. But we can see clearly that they're beginning to integrate or connect or embed the data. The rigor of the qualitative and quantitative approaches. Anymore, we're looking at articles to determine whether they actually add to the literature. So reading some of those books that are out there, some journal articles on the literature is important in use of mixed methods terms. And I will go through all these needed areas of research, but you can see there's a number of topics that still need to be explored. I would say we're not in infancy with mixed methods. We're more in the adolescent stage. What happens in adolescence? People start bickering. You become self-conscious about your identity and who you are, and go through the growing pains. And so we're into adolescence. I'm writing a piece now for a couple of conferences that are coming out on contradictory tensions in the field. And I think that's going to be really helpful. I put together some additional readings at the end to kind of direct you towards some of the literature, and you would have those on your hand. Oh, we have about 10 minutes. This is good. I may have gone too fast, too.
Yeah, feel free. Does anybody have any questions?
I think this message is very interesting. And then my question is related to establishment of research question. Using quantitative research, we can make some of the hypotheses and then go down. But using qualitative research, we don't know the fact. So we need to see what kind of fact there first. So using this method is how we can establish some kind of parties for the people.
See, now what you're telling me is that the design that you would like to use if you were to do mixed methods research is more of the explanatory sequential design, where you would start quantitatively with some concrete hypotheses, and then you might have a second qualitative phase to follow up. Which would certainly work. But we all know that you can also pose qualitative questions at the beginning of the study. And in fact, in that triangulation design, I'm reading a proposal for that project, that kind of project. I would hope to see both quantitative hypotheses and qualitative questions at the project. And I'm going to take it a step further. Because what we're doing in our book is introducing a new concept, which is you can also write a mixed methods question. Now, for that triangulation design, what would a mixed methods question look like? Well, one could be, is there convergence between the quantitative and qualitative data? Or do they contradict each other? Are there contradictory findings? That's a mixed methods question. So when I have people develop proposals for funding and using mixed methods research, I typically have them state a study aid, which is quantitative, and using a triangulation design, a study aid that's qualitative, a study aid that's quantitative, and a study aid that's mixed methods. In addition to including a visual picture of those procedures. And it lays it out very nicely. If you want to put it into the content area, you could say, will the results from the use of the depression inventory confirm the results of the ethnography? Ethnography on such and such, the instrument on such and such. So we can add some content in that statement. Well, these two content areas. Mixed methods question. In our book, we have a whole list. We take it about design, and we say, what would be the mixed methods questions? Possibilities that go with each one of the designs. Now, what I've given you here are just 4 general designs. There are variants in each one. And we have a total of, what, 10 variants among these 4 designs. So we're trying to come up with a workable, parsimonious set of designs. And then we're saying, now we'll write a mixed methods question that fits the design and be very explicit about it. And so put it in your dissertation proposal, put it in your proposal to NIH, and etc. And we're having pretty good luck on that. When you say, Vicki, you always put these ideas out in the book and write about them, and then you start getting some feedback. So far, I think it's been pretty positive on the use of mixed methods question. Most people are amazed that that even exists because, you know, you and I could turn any book on research methods and we wouldn't find mixed methods question. So we'll see in the next few years how that plays out. I'm getting, we might mention, on April 2nd, here in the Student Union, we are giving an entire day workshop on mixed methods research. Now, it's being sponsored by the College of Education and Human Sciences. And you need to contact Nancy Miller. N. Miller 3. A-U-N-L N. Miller 3. And sign up. Basically, the morning will be taking these ideas, slowing down the pace, bringing in some examples. So, for example, I have a couple of good mixed methods articles published in the education literature. And I'm actually going to hand out the article and walk through each article, talking about the mixed methods components. And I start with such things as, let's look at the title. You know, what would a mixed methods title look like? And then how do you frame the introduction to your study? So we'll look at the introduction. Move to the research purpose statement. How do you write a good purpose statement using mixed methods language? And research questions on through that article, taking it apart, focusing on the various parts. So, and then in the afternoon, people are bringing their projects over. And we will, there'll be 3 of us from our research office, and we'll divide into small groups and talk about some individual projects. So, but the key there is signing up with Nancy.
I just have one question. So in comparing the results, so you said this method, we could compare the findings from quantitative and qualitative. So if there is a difference between both research, so how to convert, how to integrate?
If there's a difference?
Yes.
Here are some options. And that's the way we look at this. I don't think there's one. What we try to do is we go into triangulation, mixed method studies, published in the journals. We look at how they began to resolve contradictions. State a limitation in your study. Second, collect some more data to resolve the contradiction. Third, reanalyze the data to see if you miss something. That's one that a researcher at New York University used in her NIH project. She has a pretty elaborate discussion about how she went back through it. Are there any others? Yeah, those are probably the main ones. Usually when I suggest collect some more data, Dr. Stu's doing it. But if you're on a multi-phase funded project in the federal government, certainly you may have the resources to resolve some of these contradictions. And it's usually certain aspects that are contradicted, so it's not reworking the entire study. And some people, there is another way. Some people will talk in their articles about how they have more faith or more confidence in the quality of data or the quantitative. And it usually comes back to their own background and what they're most comfortable with. Sometimes, too, bringing people onto research teams that are mixed methods people, or that, let's say your team is mostly quantitative, you bring a couple of qualitative people on the team. I just read a study where the researchers were primarily qualitative, and they brought a quantitative person on their team, and they reshaped their analysis and really came up with more insightful information after quantifying some of their qualitative data. And they were pretty stuck as to which direction the results should go. So there's about 6 reasons or possibilities. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Have fun late eating lunch.
And like I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in learning more about qualitative data analysis that we'll be doing, I think we had to reschedule one that Dr. Shope was going to do for us last week because of the weather. We had to reschedule it. So that one is now going to be on April 13th. Although I scheduled it for Friday the 13th, so hopefully it still happens. Probably get a freak snowstorm or something on that day too. And then on March 22nd, we're going to be doing an in vivo overview. And then on March 28th and 29th, we'll be doing the actual hands-on in vivo workshop. And if you have any other questions, just visit our website.